episode 20 this time. We're talking about Return of the Archons. Very bizarre episode. Very strange. I believe I've seen this episode more times out of any episode of the original series, possibly of any Star Trek. Premise of it, the Enterprise gets sent to planet Beta 3 to investigate the disappearance of the USS Archon 100 years earlier. It took them 100 years to send someone to find out what was happening. They were like, should we go investigate? They're like, yeah, put it off for a bit, maybe a century or so. But they get there finally, and they send Mr. Sulu and the never before seen and never again seen Mr. O'Neill to the planet. They're wearing native costumes when we see them, but they're in a panic. They're panic-stricken. Mr. Sulu calls for an emergency beam out, so Kirk says, yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it. And then O'Neill says, buggers to that, I'm just headed off. And he just runs away, right into the arms of the people that were chasing him. He had nowhere to run, but he ran. Mr. Sulu gets hit with this big stick, and then they beam him up. And then he's just high as can be. He's stoned out of his gourd. They don't know what happened, so Kirk takes a big landing party. They go down to the planet wearing native garb for no discernible reason, because they didn't try to pretend they were not coming from the Enterprise. And then they would, and then they wouldn't. It was very confusing. But they get there, and people think they're there for some sort of festival. And they're like, sure, we're here for some sort of festival. And they're like, you must be from the valley. And they're like, oh yeah, from the valley, for the festival. Then everybody just goes berserk and starts throwing bricks and rocks and grabbing each other and choking people. And they're scared Kirk, so he's like, let's get to the hotel. They get to the hotel, and the old men at the hotel can't figure out why Kirk and his party aren't out in the festival. And they're like, well, because, look, it's a riot. And they're like, yeah, but Landru. And they're like, who's Landru? And they're like, quiet, he'll hear you. And this goes on for a while. They figure out there's some mystical leader named Landru that never gets explained ever, that's controlling everyone with telepathy or mind control or something. They keep it vague. So Kirk and his crew have to figure out how to stop this Landru. The natives don't really want to help them, although they somewhat do. It gets confusing. Then the Enterprise being attacked by heat beams. Mr. Scott says the heat beams are going to deplete our shields, but we can't warp out, because the second we do, the shields will drop and then we'll burn to a crisp. They never had that problem before or since, but it was a problem that day. Lieutenant Ahura looked worried. Mr. Scott kept walking around the bridge, worried. Sulu was presumably in sick bay, oblivious to everything. And they finally figure out that Landru was a computer. So Kirk says, I got an idea. Watch this. And Spock was like, oh no, not this again. And Kirk says, oh yeah. Kirk confuses the computer, so the computer blows itself up. It's like, but I thought, and he's like, nope. How about this? And the computer's like, I didn't think of that. Oh no, and it just blows up. He did that a lot. That was his answer. Anytime a computer is in play, it's like an evil computer. I'll confuse it, and then it'll have to blow itself up. Mr. Spock was for words. Completely for words. But then, the second the computer blows up, everybody on the planet was fine. They weren't all acting weird or anything anymore. Mr. Sulu was completely fine. In fact, he was fine before that, because he'd, in the instant the ship was out of danger, shown up on the bridge to relieve the person on helm duty. Scott hadn't cleared him. He just said, "Yeah, you're relieved," and just took his seat. So maybe he still was feeling the effects, I don't know. That was basically what happened. Some interesting show notes. They were loose with the Prime Directive this episode. Very loose, because they beamed down to the planet in full view of all the natives, but then tried to pretend they were from the planet, when obviously they just beamed there in front of them. Mr. Spock wore this big monk-style robe with a hood so he could hide his ears, so they wouldn't know he's a Vulcan. But then he just pulled the hood down and showed his ears. Nobody said one word. Not a single word was said. But then he would pull it back up half the time, pull it down the other half. They never was consistent with that. And they would use phasers right in front of the people, but then in the same breath they'd be afraid of violating the Prime Directive. So they couldn't make up their minds with that. One really fascinating thing, Mr. Spock was asking the natives that were helping them, like, how they were opposed to this Landru. And then when they explained, he's like, an underground. You just see this flashbulb go off in his mind. He's like, I can use that later. So it set the stage for his leading an underground on Romulus decades later. He led his own underground on Romulus. Tried to reunite the Vulcans and the Romulans. All started here with Return of the Archons. That planted the seed in his mind, apparently. Lieutenant Uhura was in this episode, but had almost nothing to do. I don't think she even had a single line. Mr. Scott was on the bridge. He was in command. He didn't do a whole lot except pace and tell the captain they were going to burn up. McCoy and Sulu both completely stoned out of their minds, apparently, from the stick that Mr. Spock found to be just a hollow tube. They didn't know how that worked. They never explained how it worked. No explanation given. It was just a hollow tube, but it had these powers from a computer. A computer shouldn't be able to do that. But that's pretty much the episode.